Welcome back to another episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, the president of Dale Carnegie Train Japan, and my special guest today is an old friend of mine, Timothy Langley, CEO of Langley Esquire. Timothy, thank you very much for hosting me in your beautiful office today. I really appreciate that. It's gorgeous.
Thank you very much.
So you've had an unbelievably fascinating career. I've known you for a long time, and I've listened to your podcast on our mutual friend Andrew Hankinson's.
That's right.
Zen and Now. Now and Zen. I should get that right. That was a fascinating interview you had with him. Today we're going to talk about leadership. But tell us, how did you get to become the CEO here in Japan of, Langley Esquire? What's the route to get here?
So I think a lot of people comment on my background and my legacy here in Japan, and I think it's just a consequence of having been here for so long. So even among foreigners that you and I know and run across on a daily basis, I think I'm one of the ones that have been here really long. I've been here for more than 40 years.
That is
So I grew up on Okinawa. I come from a military family, and during the Vietnam War, my father was stationed to Okinawa as a part of the war effort. So me and my 7 brothers and sisters moved to Okinawa, and we stayed there for 2 tours. So during the really formative years of my life, I was growing up in Okinawa. He got his orders to go to his next post, which is where he retired. That was in Atlanta, Georgia. So I finished high school and college in Atlanta, actually the University of Georgia in Athens, and I just couldn't wait to come back to Japan. So it took a little bit of a hook and a crook and here and there, and I finally did eventually come back to Japan about 8 years after I finished college.
So I should have started this whole episode by saying Chaganju, seeing you spent all those years in Okinawa.
Right.
So how many years between finishing uni and getting back to Japan?
So that was about 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you worked in the States first before you came back to Japan?
So I finished college. I worked in a local university. I was teaching English as a second language. Then I moved to Los Angeles, Santa Monica. I played for the Santa Monica Rugby Club.
Wow. As a professional?
No, there's no professional in the United States,
okay,
right? But it was at that time the best rugby club in the United States. So I went out to Santa Monica to try out for the team. I made the team, and then I was teaching in UCLA and waiting for a good opportunity, a good job to bring me to Japan.
So where does the law part of it fit in? Where's the law degree fit in?
So I always wanted to go to law school. I attempted to get into law school while I was in the United States. But, I don't come from money. I've got other brothers and sisters, and my father said, if you want to go to college, just college, right? If you want to go to college, we really endorse that. You can come home and have dinner and get your laundry done from time to time, but, good luck with that. So that was a bit of a stretch, but I found a Monbusho opportunity way back then. This was in 1976.
Okay. We're close. I'm Monbusho, 1979.
Okay. So
very close.
So Monbusho had been in process for a while, a couple of years. I was from Georgia. There's 7 states in that region that's handled by the Consul General's office in Atlanta. And this area, this 7-state area, had never received a Monbusho scholarship. So I took the test. I didn't pass it.
I'm sure you did.
I didn't
really?
pass it.
After all those years in Okinawa?
No, even after all those years in Okinawa.
Right.
Because when I was in Okinawa, it didn't belong to Japan.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It became a part of Japan after I left. So it was really a U.S. protectorate. The currency of use was the U.S. dollar. They drove on the wrong side of the road. And it's not accurate to say that English was the language of the land, but it was English and Okinawa Ben, not even really Japanese. So.
Right.
So I was responding to your question about
how did you get into the law? You
okay.
did the Monbusho, you took the exam, you didn't pass it, and then what happened?
So I was trying to figure out how I could go to law school, and I found out about Monbusho, and I took the test for it. And the deal with Monbusho is they will pay for you to go to the school of your choice. You need to qualify for it, but they'll pay for it. You just need to convince them that you are a good candidate for that.
But is that a school in Japan or a school in America?
A school in Japan.
Wow, okay, good.
So I didn't pass the first one, so I went to Los Angeles. I played rugby. I looked for an opportunity to take me to some place that no foreigner in their right mind would live, so that I would be immersed and learn the Japanese as quickly as possible, come back to Atlanta and take the annual test, again, pass the test, and then go to law school.
Right.
And that's what I did.
Wow. So which forlorn, remote place in Japan did you wind up going?
Well, you're going to laugh, but it was Akita.
Akita. Oh,
Akita.
okay.
It's the reason why it's kind of isolated at that point in time. This was a long time ago, 30, 40 years ago, is that it's on the Japan seaside, not on the Pacific side. And it's far north, so it receives a lot of winter precipitation. So it's a tough place to live. And there were some Mormon missionaries there that I became friends with. But other than that, it was really empty of foreigners or speaking English or anything like that.
And so where did you go to law school?
Went to Sendai on the other side of the island.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Right.
Which was a tough gig.
Yeah.
Of course, I was the only foreigner in the law program. It was a graduate school program.
Yeah.
There were 35 other students with me. Yeah.
So how do you get your qualifications as a lawyer? Is it both America and Japan you've got? Or?
So at that point in time, you needed to finish law school and then sit for the bar.
Right.
So going to law school was one of the qualifications. So when I finished law school, I applied to sit for the bar here in Japan, and they said, "Oh, you guys good? You not you." And I said, "What do you mean, not me?" And they said, "Well, you're
not Japanese.
You don't look like us." And I said, wait, guys. I just put myself through 2 years of law school here, understanding that I would be able to sit for the bar. They said, "Yeah, but, number one, you're not Japanese. You might not have noticed that. But number two, it has never been done. No foreigner has sat for this exam, much less passed it. And the opportunity or the chance of you passing it is so low, because even if you're a Japanese kid, the chance of you passing this exam is less than 1%. Okay? So we're not going to endorse it. We're not going to authorize it." So I was devastated. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I started looking around for another job. I wasn't finished kind of learning about Japan. I had been in law school the whole time. So I had depth of knowledge, but I didn't have breadth of knowledge. I found a job in Tokyo, working for a member of the parliament. This was the summer that the United States senators decided to bash the Toyotas on the Capitol Hill steps.
Yeah, I remember that.
This was the beginning of the trade war. Before that, the United States and Japan were very copacetic. There were no issues. And the automobile issue flared up, and it was a big fight. It was a big deal. And one of the politicians who was prominent, he was always mentioned in newspaper articles about going on delegations to the United States to explain, why the intestines are longer and why the snow is different, right? These kinds of things. Yeah. So I wrote to him and I introduced myself. I sent him my Lileksho and did all my CV with the photograph and my blood type and my favorite hobbies. And eventually they hired me. So I moved to Tokyo.
And that would have been a unique thing. And I believe you're the first ever to have that position, which is amazing.
It is. It's pretty amazing. I wrote a book about it. Yeah. I wrote a book in Japanese about that experience because it was amazing. And even as I'm sitting here now, yes, I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
Well, Tsunari, you're not good enough to get into take the bar exam to become a lawyer, but please join the parliament and work for a parliamentarian. That's quite incredible. So, okay, you do that for how many years?
I did that for about 2 years. Okay. As I was about halfway through it, I was approached by a publisher. Actually, my boss was approached by a publisher. And they said, we'd like this guy, because 60 Minutes had already done a piece on me. And it was so unique that there was a foreigner working in Japanese politics. I mean, it's rare, even in
today.
Yeah, even today, it's quite rare. Plus, I'm blessed with this wonderfully suggestive last name, right?
Langley, right? Yeah.
Langley. So everybody, they all think we're spies anyway when you walk around Kumagaseki, right? They're always suspicious. What embassy do you work in?
Yeah.
I don't work in an embassy. They say, okay, right.
Okay, right. Yeah.
But this was even before this kind of I don't know, this kind of way of thinking about foreigners. This was far earlier, right? And it's a closed society, especially there. So unless you have business there, well, you know, representing your country or something like that, you don't belong there. So stick out like a thumb, I did.
And then what's the sort of progression from there? What happens next?
So I still wanted to practice law. So I met the dean of the School of Foreign Service from Georgetown University. One of my best friends was the alumni head of Georgetown here in town.
Oh,
Okay, so he was a U.S. diplomat. He went to Georgetown. He was about 10 years older than me. And I would help him with his events at Georgetown because we hung out together. And the dean of the School of Foreign Service came to Tokyo to drum up business, to collect students, and to get funding, that sort of thing. And he met me at one of these alumni events. And he said, you know, in my program, we don't have a Japan hand. In the Graduate School of Foreign Service, we don't have a Japan hand. You would be really good for that program. Why don't you apply? And I said, well, I've kind of got my eyes set on going to law school. He says, well, why don't you apply to the law school at Georgetown? And I said, well, you know, I mean, the reason why I went to Monbusho is because I didn't have the money for it. And I doubted I would be able to pay for Georgetown too. And he said, well, look, if you apply to my program, it's a 2-year program. We have a law school too. So apply to my program, do my program, and then transition into law school, and I'll help you out.
wow. Nice.
Yeah, kind of nice, but that means the arduous 3 years of a law program is going to be extended to possibly 5 years, right? I don't want to go to graduate school and then graduate school again, but that was the trade-off. So I went to graduate school for the School of Foreign Service and transitioned in my second year into the law school, and I did both of them for the next 3 years. And
Doing double degree.
during double degree.
Oh my God, that's
Yeah.
a nightmare.
It was a nightmare, yeah.
And so you come out as a lawyer. You're now fully qualified American lawyer. And what
Right.
was next?
So at that point in time, the fellow who was my boss, who hired me out of Japanese law school, had become foreign minister
Wow.
by the time I had finished law school. So now he was foreign minister. I was picked up by a law firm in Atlanta, Georgia. I got married to my girlfriend from Japan. She came over, not knowing anything about the United States. We got married the weekend after I was graduated from Georgetown. We went to Atlanta, passed the bar, worked in a big law firm, and then I was hired by a manufacturing company in Kyoto who was being investigated by the U.S. Commerce Department for dumping products illegally against U.S. trade
How
law.
does a firm in Kyoto find you to come and help them with this particular legislation?
This is a worldwide dominant player in chips and condensers. And their subsidiary in Japan, in the United States, was in Atlanta. And so the law firm had been doing work for them, just regular, normal work. But this trade issue wasn't an Atlanta issue. It was a big issue. And they needed somebody who spoke Japanese, who was a trade and investment lawyer, and knew that sort of thing. And so the School of Foreign Service actually came in to help me on that particular component.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. The planets are finally aligning here.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for them to align, Greg.
Partially aligned anyway. Great.
Yeah.
And so how long were you with that American law firm?
About 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah, 2 years. And this client said, we're in trouble. We need this fellow. Please send him over. So I had to actually break from the law firm and go there. And I worked inside the company as their attorney.
Right.
Yeah. Also another very rare instance because there were no other foreigners there, and it was a manufacturing company. So when you go into they run on factory time, so you need to be at your desk at 7:45. And you put a schmuck on, not your suit. And you're in a big room, the Somuka, the General Affairs office. And, at 8 o'clock you do radio calisthenics, right? So you know the gig.
You're really, really fitting in nicely there.
Oh my gosh, it was great, a really great experience. Not one that I would want to repeat, but...
But that's interesting, because very few foreigners have worked inside
That's right.
Japanese companies, and so you're seeing it from the inside out, which I think gives you, from many perspectives, a lot of advantages in dealing with Japan, dealing with Japanese companies. That's
Right.
great. So what happens after the time of internal counsel for the...
Well, let me respond just a little bit, embellish a little bit about
Sure.
what you said. Working in a Japanese company. So like I said, it's not an experience that I wanted to repeat or I would like to repeat, but it was a valuable experience in seeing how the Japanese work internally, how they get things done, how the office works, how decisions are being made. Lingicho, right? How you
put all the stamps on the piece of paper to
put the
approve
stamp to approve, getting a water cooler or extending the break time. Anything that happens within a Japanese company, typically, well, at this particular point in time, this was during the bubble actually, the ringi system was the way that you got things done. And how they do meetings, what the pecking order is, and you can't learn that. It's like learning Japanese. It's difficult to learn Japanese unless your mother was Japanese, right? So people like you and me, we had an incredibly more difficult time.
Struggle, yeah.
Similarly with dealing with Japanese business, having that opportunity to actually do it the way they do it is extremely valuable. It helps you. It helps you with empathy. It helps you kind of put your mind into what they're thinking, what they're doing. It helps you make decisions.
Did you have any direct reports at that time, or were you a sort of a specialized person?
No, I wish I was a specialized person, but they told me, even Dr. Nakayama, when he hired me out of Japanese law school, he says, listen, I'm gonna hire you, Tim, but there are a couple of stipulations here. I'm gonna hire you just like you were a Japanese kid that I would hire. So no special treatment, no preferences, Saturdays and Sundays, there's no holidays. You work for me just like a Japanese kid, okay? And if you do that for me, if you dedicate yourself to me, I'll give you an experience that'll change your life. And he performed on that. Similarly, in the Japanese company that I was working in Kyoto, I was in the general affairs office, one of the biggest offices. Sales is pretty big, marketing is pretty big, but general affairs is pretty big, and it's about 40 people. And you have the bucho, maybe 8 bucho desks, and then
division head.
Division head, and then maybe 8 desks facing each other, where they're at the
They're
head.
sitting like the head of the family at the table there, and all the divisions are lined up.
That's right. It's very organized.
So were you actually leading anyone? Were you? Did you have subordinates at that time?
I was the only lawyer in the company.
Right, so you didn't have any subordinates necessarily.
I had no subordinates, but I did have a couple of bosses.
What did you notice about the way that Japanese led internally, right? So you're not actually having to lead anyone at this point in time, but you're being led, I presume, and also you're seeing how they lead each other.
Right.
What were some of the differences you noted about that?
Oh, it was, so for me, it was a really harsh reality check, because I was in the United States. I finished law school. I was working in a law firm. And then I came into Kyoto, which is a really, it's a different part of Japan, right? Yeah. And all of the good things that are wonderful that people love to talk about Japan are at their highest form in Kyoto. Similarly, all of the things that you hate, that people denigrate being in Japan about, they are also at their highest form in Kyoto, okay? So, inside the organization, it's like some American companies too. It's a family-owned corporation, worldwide corporation, still family-held. So
is this a 17th generation type of family?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So they were making pottery first, and then they found that through these ceramics you can make chips and condensers, and let's add some other things to it. So they went from making pottery into chips and condensers.
Amazing.
Yes. Yeah. So with regard to leadership, since it was a family-owned business, there was the father and then the sons and then the uncles and the aunts. So that created one layer of leadership, and it was almost godlike, right? And then you had the direct reports to these fellows, and it was rather concrete. They're in those positions. They're in those positions until they retire, right, at the bucho level. And then you have the really eager kakaricho and the people who are reporting to them, the section heads, the people who are trying to move up that ladder. But basically, since it's a Japanese company, you're going to be there until you die. So that leadership and that aspiration that you might have to be a leader, it's it's applied very differently than it might be in a competitive environment, such as in the United States.
So everyone's adjusted their expectations, and usually in those traditional Japanese companies, you join in a certain year with your cohort, you all become a certain level at about the same time, and you sort of work your way up until you get to the very, very peak. Now, in this particular company's case, you're not going to get to the peak because they're all family members.
That's right.
But you know that, by the age of 40, I'll be this, at the age of 50, I'll be that.
Right.
And probably in this case, I will never become the president. I won't become a vice president because one of the family members will do that. But I know where I'll be. I know my place in the hierarchy.
Right.
And I know I just, work hard, keep my nose clean. It's going to work out okay.
That's right. Don't make any mistakes. Don't ruffle anybody's feathers. Do what you're told. Yeah.
So after this company, what happened then?
So after this company, the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Is that what they call it? The Commonwealth of Kentucky?
It is a Commonwealth. They don't call it the state of Kentucky. It's a Commonwealth of Kentucky.
Because we have the Commonwealth of Australia.
Right.
So that's quite unusual about the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
It's unusual, and it's kind of unique. Kentucky's a little bit of a unique state for a lot of different reasons. But Kentucky had landed Toyota to manufacture in the United States. And the governor does a Japan tour once every 2 or 3 years. And he had come to Japan, a new governor, came to Tokyo. He was going to be wined and dined and go visit Toyota. And please, why don't you open your expansion plant, right? But as soon as he came to Japan, he didn't like the representative of the state office, the Commonwealth of Kentucky's office in Tokyo.
Oh, Japanese?
A Japanese fellow.
Okay.
And fired him.
Oh, right.
On the spot.
Oh, right.
And everybody was saying...
It's a very American approach. Boom.
Everybody was saying, Governor, please, you can't do that. I mean, we found this guy. We're lucky to have him. He's a really good guy. I know you don't like him because whatever he did. And the governor basically said, look, I'm the governor.
I'm the governor.
I don't want to see him. Get him out of my face.
Wow.
So now they don't have a leader in the Commonwealth's Tokyo office, and this is going on for 2 years.
Oh.
Okay? So his lieutenants came to Tokyo 3 times looking for somebody to lead the Kentucky charge and get Toyota to expand their manufacturing facilities in Kentucky. And I received a phone call from somebody in the U.S. Embassy and while I was in Kyoto. And this fellow said, hey, Langley, listen, I don't remember if you're from Kentucky or whatever, but you struck me as a bit of a Southerner.
Right.
So I got these guys that are just, they're beating the bushes, they're coming up empty, and I just thought of you because you had been here a couple of years ago and I remember you and you speak Japanese and maybe you could do what they want to get done. So can I introduce them to you? And I said, yeah, but I've got a job here in Kyoto. I'm doing an important job for this company, but yeah, I'll meet them. The next day, these guys show up in Kyoto.
Wow, okay.
And, this is...
Which in those days, there would have been a Shinkansen by that time, I guess.
That's right.
So it would have been one of the old slow Shinkansens down to Kyoto, right?
That's right. That's
Probably
right.
took about 4 hours or something. Yeah.
So these 2 guys came in and they said, we really like you. We want you to go meet the governor. I'm sorry, this is a long-winded story. But
No, go for it.
So I said, okay, but it's hard for me to just pick up. And they said, well, wait for a 4-day weekend and we'll fly you to Kentucky. You'll meet the governor and we want to have you as a candidate. So I said, okay, I waited for the weekend. I went to Kentucky. I met the governor. And before I left, I called my mom up. And I said, Mom, hi, I'm in the United States, but I don't have time to come and visit you. I'm in Kentucky. And she goes, well, that's great, honey. What are you doing? I said, well, not to upset you, but I think I might change jobs again, right? I was in the law firm, and then I went to Kyoto. These guys from Kentucky want me to be their representative, their ambassador in Japan. And she goes, well, that's just wonderful, honey. And I said, yeah, but they want somebody from Kentucky. They want a Kentucky boy. And I don't know who else they're talking to, but I'm not a Kentucky boy. And she said, well, you can tell them you're from Kentucky. And I said, no, they'll find out, and then I'll get fired. And she goes, no, don't you remember? This silver that you were polishing when you were a young kid, that came from the governor's mansion.
Oh.
And I said, you stole The silver from the governor's mansion? And she said her maiden name is Adair.
Uh-huh.
And on the back of the silver, it said, to General John Adair, in a great appreciation. And he was the 6th governor of Kentucky.
Wow.
And it was her great-grandfather.
Wow.
And they have a tradition in my family that the silver is passed down from the mother to the oldest daughter.
Right.
And she was the oldest daughter in her family.
Wow.
Even though she married my father and became a Langley, her maiden name was Adair.
Wow.
And she says, he was the 6th governor of Kentucky. And you can tell them that.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so I had the same reaction. I said,
Bingo.
why didn't you tell me this? She goes, you children never listen to anything, right? Just like a mom would say,
Yeah,
right?
true.
So I said, can I call you back? And so I hung up and I called Kentucky and I said, listen, I didn't want to brag, but,
Yeah.
and they said, well, we had already decided on you. And if you'd accept the job, we'll send over the term sheet.
Wow.
That was even before I left the United States.
Wow. Bingo. And so then you
So-
break the bad news to the Japanese company and head to Tokyo.
Then I headed to Tokyo.
Right.
So it was a good transition out. So I tendered my resignation, and I came to, actually before I came to Tokyo, we did a month in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And that was really nice. Treated like royalty, taken to all of the bourbon whiskey stills and go to the horse races and
Shooting and all that sort of stuff.
it was just fantastic because they wanted to sell me on Kentucky.
Yeah, exactly.
This is what
you
you're
have
going
to
to
represent.
That's right.
Yeah. So how long were you doing that?
So I did that for about 2 years.
And did you have staff at that time?
I had 2 staff. My office was in Kamiyacho. And in that time, we got Toyota to commit to Kentucky to build their expansion plan. So this was a big deal.
So I imagine those 2 people who were in the office had been there all the time through. Their
That's right.
boss had gotten fired, but they'd stayed on.
That's right.
And so they like sort of tenured Japanese staff in a way, aren't they? Semi-governmental or governmental employees. Very hard to get rid of them.
Right.
And you inherit them. So you're now leading 2 people who've been there for a long time. You turn up. How do you go about getting them on board with you?
Well, you're assuming that they actually got on board.
Well, I am assuming. That's
Right.
why we want to hear that story.
That's right. So, yeah, as the new kid on the block, nobody really likes it, And by the way, the boss was gone, and so I had all this authority and all of this discretion, and now you're coming in and you're taking that away from me, and it's not so comfortable anymore. I don't have the 2-hour lunches, and I'm not calling the shots. And I have to explain stuff to you, and you don't know what's going on, and you don't know the difference between a thoroughbred and a quarter horse, and I have to explain that to you, right? So it's a lot of work. It's a lot more of an ordeal for them. And generally speaking, there's a period. It's like a honeymoon, right? You might have where everybody's nice, and then you get down to brass tacks, and it becomes a little bit more difficult. And then you have to exercise control and management, and it can be tough.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. So what were some of the challenges? I mean, if you're forming your own business, you're hiring people, you've got direct control. When you're inheriting people in any organization, that's difficult. When you're inheriting people in Japan, that is particularly difficult.
Right.
I opened an operation in Nagoya, 2 people, right? I had staff of 2 people, but I hired them.
You hired them.
So
that's a huge difference.
Big difference.
That's
so
right.
How did you go around getting these people on board, or did you have to move them out?
No, I didn't move them out. You're really reluctant, and you actually should have better techniques than moving people out. They're there for a reason. They have been vetted, they're experienced, they have some good to offer, even though you might have some friction there. So the
governor didn't have that problem.
The governor didn't have that problem, no.
Gone, right? Yeah. So what do you do? How do you adjust?
So it really depends. When you inherit your staff. It does depend. These guys had 2 years of no leadership.
Right.
Okay, so that's big.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, running the office, paying the bills, reporting to headquarters, visitors coming in. You're basically handling it, and then you got you have some guy coming in who is now calling the shots, and he's not doing it the way that I would do it, and so people are watching with a very critical eye. Plus, they're working harder and they're receiving less love. So it's
and this is probably your first real leadership position
That's
because
right.
you've been a lawyer, and lawyers don't really have subordinates; they're experts, and you have clerical staff and whatever, or junior lawyers.
That's right.
But it's a bit different to actually an office, 2 people, you're the boss. So that must have been quite hard to adjust to being a leader for the really, with subordinates. How did you make that adjustment?
Well, part of the job was being kind of a showman. You have to promote the state, and you have to take people who are from the state who've come to visit to Japan to interact with their counterparts, maybe their competitors or maybe their potential joint venture partners. So I'm out of the office quite a bit. So at some point in time, we were able to figure out what you're good at, what I'm good at.
Right.
I'm going to diminish that role from you, but you're not getting a salary decrease. You're safe in your position. So probably one of the most important things is because I was an American and everybody has this expectation, well, it's going to be an American. He's going to fire everybody. He's going to put his own people in. And I don't know if that stereotype is accurate, but it does go around.
Yeah.
And people, here in this country, and yourself, the most important thing for any Japanese person working in a company is preservation of their livelihood. Keep my job. So when they come in as a first year employee or their second year employee, they're being trained by their subordinates, not their subordinates,
superiors.
by their superiors. And there is a definite pecking order. But if you look at how it's done in the bigger corporations, they spend almost all their time ingratiating themselves to their colleagues at the lateral and also to the people above. And you just show up early, you do what you're told, you come in clean, the necktie is straight. You just want to maintain. And the longer that you're maintained, the more secure you become. So people, they're very risk averse, as people know. And they're punctual, they get the job done, but they follow the manual.
And generally speaking, Japanese in those types of semi-government or governmental jobs are usually pretty well paid. When I worked in the Australian Embassy, the people who were reporting to me in the trade area, they, as Japanese employees, were on pretty good dough, compared to what they'd be getting in the private sector.
Sure.
So after Kentucky, how long were you there for?
I was in Kentucky for about 2 years. The governor was going for an election, and the fellow who came to Kentucky, the fellow who went to Kyoto to hire me knew that the governor was going to lose.
Oh.
And he was in charge of Kentucky international investment. What they're doing all over. The trade office that we had in Tokyo was like the trade office in Germany, that sort of thing. He was the head. He had no international experience. Japan was booming at that time. And so he told the governor, listen, you're going to be gone. I need, I need to get my credentials. And I would like to go to Japan. And give me 2 or 3 months and I'll be fluent in Japanese. And
no problem.
No problem.
Just knock the baby right over there. Yep.
So, in fact, I lost my job only because he walked in one day, unbeknownst to me, and said, guess who's the new guy here?
Wow.
Just like that.
That's a transition and a half.
That was the transition.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Thank you very much, Timothy.
It was.
Don't let the door hit you in the backside on the way out.
It was really brutal.
Wow, that's terrible.
At the same time, though, Apple Computer was looking for a chief lawyer and somebody to run their government affairs. So I wasn't
in-house counsel for them.
In-house counsel for them. So
great.
that transition,
that was probably, in a way, one door closed, but a better door.
Yes.
A bigger door open, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Nice. And Apple was how long for Apple?
Apple was about 4 years.
So again, I guess in Apple, you're again a very highly specialized person as the in-house counsel. You're probably not having to lead, or are you looking after the SORMU booth, after the general affairs section as well?
No. So
how did that work?
Apple was really interesting. This was in the John Scully era.
Okay, right.
So at Apple, you have a 5 years, and then you have a sabbatical. You must take a sabbatical, 1 month sabbatical, get out of the company, do whatever you're going to do,
Right.
and think about what you're going to do after you leave Apple.
Was this a Scully innovation, or is this a job?
No, this
has been going on for a long time.
This has been going on for a
Very
while.
unique.
So he was in his second iteration, okay? And when he took his sabbatical the second time, that's when they did the coup d'etat, right? So I was with him here, and then when he got the axe, then since I was reporting almost directly to Scully,
Right.
so then my time came up too.
It's a deadly business, the corporate world, isn't it?
It really is.
Anything changes at the top and you're down the bottom, it's bound to have a bad impact on you. So what happens after that?
So Apple Computer, I was the first lawyer for them to hire in Asia. They had been looking for quite a while. They couldn't find anybody. There were 59 employees in the company when they hired me.
Wow.
So there was no legal division. Legal was being handled by HR. So I had to take the files from HR and create the legal division. And so it was like building from scratch. So I had half a staff, the person who was handling legal in HR, who wasn't legally qualified for doing that, but he was the head count. And in time, I was able to hire a full-time staff for just legal. And then I found one more for the public affairs, because I was doing the public affairs for Apple at the same time.
So having come through that period where you've inherited 2 staff, and now you're actually within the company, you're able to get staff to come and work for you. Did you find also from your previous management experience at this time it went a bit more smoothly, it was more easy, or was there a different set of circumstances that made it difficult?
The different set of circumstances are just as you alluded to earlier. Hiring people, committing to them committing to you. They will do stuff for you. I mean, you know this yourself. People really, I don't know if it's an overstatement. People love their jobs here. They love doing what they do, and they want to be really good at it. And they want their boss or their superiors to respect and appreciate their value. So they really do go above and beyond the call of duty on many, many instances. You find that a lot with people that you hire, less with people that you inherit.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
The most difficult thing that I dealt with in Apple was the internecine warfare between divisions. The sales guy, the marketing guy. There's a pecking order, and people, Apple was starting to grow. I went through 4 presidents in the 4 years that I was there. So a lot of turmoil.
That's another nightmare.
Oh, a lot of turmoil, and a lot of, if you cut corners or if you do something a little bit, kind of slick, you can probably gain an advantage. It might not be a long-term advantage. It might be an advantage that somebody's going to criticize you for, but there's a lot of that going on in a company like a growing company.
And so how many years at Apple then?
So Apple was about 4 years.
4 years. Right?
4 years. And when John Scully got it.
And then so what's the next step then?
So at the same time, at that point in time, I was on the board of the American Chamber of Commerce. And one of my fellow board members was the president of Amway Japan.
Right, okay.
And he approached me before any kind of hint of something going on within Apple really arose. And he was kind of pitching me and inviting me over and taking me to dinner. And he said, Amway really could use somebody with your skill and experience.
And Amway at that time, I think, was probably very big and growing fast.
Amway has, in Japan, always been big and growing. They have a beautiful building in Shibuya.
They do, yeah.
But they make a lot of their worldwide revenue out of Japan. Japan is a very successful market for them.
And so, obviously, this now looks like a great transition.
It looks like a great transition until the boss decided it wasn't working for him.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And that took, how long did that take? That took about a year and a half.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Right.
And I retired from Amway.
Thank you very much.
I retired from Amway and went back to the United States.
Oh, okay.
Went to Denver, Colorado.
Right.
Started a law firm. Bought a house.
Right.
Everything was
Settled. All
Yep,
good.
I was back
Wife's
in the United
happy.
States. Wife's happy. The
Everything's
4
good.
kids are
Kids are
getting
running around
their
having a
American
wild time
experience.
in
That's
Denver.
right.
I've been to Denver.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those wide streets. You can turn a big horse-drawn cart around the street. I remember those.
Yeah.
Me explaining why the streets are so wide.
The Rocky Mountains just in the back.
Right there.
Yeah,
Right
it's-
there. Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah. Great experience.
Yeah. And so, how many years were you there?
Let me see. I was there for maybe 3 years.
But the old magnet, the Japan magnet, did it pull you back?
Not really. So I thought this was going to be my, my package. I bought a house, started a law firm, started a business. Things were going pretty well, and then General Motors showed up. General Motors came to me and they said, "We have a position in Tokyo we've been trying to fill for 2 years. It is to be the general counsel and the director of government affairs for us in Asia, headquartered in Tokyo."
So the whole of Asia.
Yes.
Wow, that's a big job.
That's a big job.
That is a really big job.
And I said, that's great, and I'd really like to submit my application, but I'm here in Denver. I just bought a house. Things are going well. And they said, but we have suffered from Toyota and fighting with them in all of our markets, and we have made a strategic decision. We're going to take the fight to Japan. So this is a big deal for us, and we want the best people for this onslaught, and it's going to be tough. One of the things we want to do is join the Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association,
Which has no foreign companies inside.
which has no foreign companies. And we want you to help us get into this club, this lobbying club, which is maybe impossible, but we want to try it. We want to take the fight to the Japanese. That sounds pretty interesting.
Pretty good, yeah.
Right?
Pretty challenging.
After a couple of months of negotiation, I said okay, and picked up and moved everything from Denver to Japan.
So what year are we in now? What are we up to?
This is 2000.
Right, 2000, okay, right.
2001?
2001, yeah.
Right.
So I came back from Osaka to Tokyo in 2001. So we probably lobbed into town around about the same time.
Right,
Yeah, okay.
right. So that job lasted less than a year.
Oh.
It lasted less than a year
Wow.
because of 9/11. 9/11, basically after 9/11, General Motors decided China is looking much better.
Right.
And so they had stock holdings in almost all of the Japanese manufacturers. In Isuzu, they probably owned more than 50% of Isuzu, of several Japanese manufacturers. They had joint stock shareholdings. They were manufacturing a car with Suzuki, badged as a GM car, which qualified them to join the
Manufacturers Association.
Japan Automobile Manufacturers Association. So we were going great guns, and then 9/11.
It's interesting though, because Japan actually did reasonably well during 9/11. I mean, it didn't impact the Japanese economy that badly. So it's sort of interesting that sort of spilled over and hit you.
Yeah.
It's just like, this is a nightmare, isn't it? These big changes. So what do you do? You just move the family, the kids are in school, you got a place here. Well, where do we go? Back to Denver? What happens?
Yeah, so the deal was with General Motors, I'm going to move with you, but I don't want to have this switcheroo. I'm going to make the commitment to you. I'm going to move to Japan. I'm going to bring the car, right? My hobby, right? I'm going to bring the barbecue, and I'm not going to be cutting grass on the weekends like I kind of like to do, and I don't have the 3-car garage, but I'm going to do it, right? But yeah, that is the kind of deal. So when General Motors decided that Japan is not really their favorite cup of tea anymore, and when a company like that, they make strategic decisions, it's slow moving to make those decisions generally, but implementation is rather quick. Yeah. So I decided I was going to be in Japan, and the kids are in school, and so I'm going to stick it out. And so I established this company.
So that inspired you to say, for once, I'm going to be in control. I'm not going to have someone deciding a policy change, and I'm now having to look around for a job. So
that's right. Yeah. That's right.
So at that time, I think there were probably, I can't think there'd be too many people doing the type of work that you're doing, and maybe just describe what you actually do, because people may think you're a lobbyist or they
Right.
think you're just acting as a lawyer here, but you're doing more than that.
Okay, so at that point in time, I'm trying to figure out what is my value add. For Apple and for General Motors, my value add was rather clear. I was the general counsel. I was, managing several law firms, and I was doing the government affairs, which for Apple and for General Motors was a big deal, very big deal, and it had the attention of the top. Not always does legal have so much attention, but the public affairs and public policy and the government relations does have the attention of the
And
top
government
executives.
relations means someone like you who's worked in the diet, who's got, connections already and through, we work with in Kyoto, in Kentucky, etc. That's a plus because you actually have got either a direct connection or maybe an entree to meet someone you need
Sure.
to meet, which is a big advantage. That not many people have that.
No, very few people have that. And at this point in time, this was 2001, right? 9/11 was in 2001. There were probably maybe 8 or 10 guys, and each of them, Glenn Fukushima, Skip Orr, there are a couple of other guys of that caliber, of that profile. There were only about 8 or 10 of us, right? Doing it for the companies. But if a company wanted Glenn or Skip or somebody like that to do something for them, they couldn't do it. They were already embedded in a company.
Yeah.
So there were very few providers that could do that. So I decided that's the kind of work I'm going to do. And while I was at General Motors and at Apple, I was their head of government affairs and their general counsel. In Japan, if you are a lawyer, a foreign certified lawyer, you can practice law to a certain degree when you have one employer inside the company. So you can be the general counsel and you can practice law. Once you go out, you can't hang up a sign that says, I'm certified to practice law and I can help you solve your problems. The Japan Bar Association strictly regulates that. So once I'm outside of a corporation, you really can't do the kind of legal work, writing contracts and managing law firms. You really can't do that for pay. So that really diminished my ability to be actively engaged. So I helped a lot of people get out of a lot of different situations on corporate issues, on crisis management issues, on corporate communications, that sort of thing. But the predominant focus was on the government relations because there are lots of lawyers in this town. There are lots of foreign qualified lawyers.
Today, yeah.
Today there are. But even at that point, there are few who are practitioners of government affairs or public policy.
And so you I guess, over the years you've had a number of Japanese staff working for you. How did you find that? You start the company, you're hiring people in. It's probably not a big team at that stage, you're leading them. What were some of the challenges of leading? Now it's your business, right? You're responsible 100% for this.
Yeah.
And to get people to come and join you.
Yes.
Oh, I'd like you to come and work for Apple. Oh, okay. Even I'd like to come and work for Kentucky. Oh, that sounds pretty good. Amway, whatever. But now it's Langley, Esquire. How do you convince people to come and work for a very small operation, which has got no history and starting from nothing?
So when I was at Apple, Apple faced the same situation. Nobody really knew who Apple was. They knew who Steve Jobs was. They knew what the Lisa was. They knew that little computer. They knew that there was something going on with a lot of U.S. upstarts, Dell, Compaq, IBM, that sort of thing. But parents of Japanese kids who had finished college, who might be applying for work, had never heard of Apple, and they didn't want to have that kind of opportunity for their kids. So Apple was confronted with the same situation. So what they had to do was steal qualified employees from other places. So now all of a sudden you have to come up, you have to offer a signing bonus, or you have to give them more salary. And the people that you draw in, sometimes it's just not a good mix. So I'd already had a pretty wide experience there in hiring and firing people, because it was just a real struggle for Apple. So when I started my own company, first of all, we don't have the project flow that allows me to hire 10 or 15 people, right? So you're starting slow. Every person that you hire is a valuable, precious commodity for you. So the people that came to me, I already had some sort of a personal relationship with. So you approach them and you convince them and you make them all sorts of promises about how the job is going to be great and how you're going to treat them, and you convince them to come in. It's basically a sales job because you've got to get the job done. Yeah.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. And then at some point, you bring family members, your sons, into the business. So, of all the people I've interviewed, no one has had family members in the business because they're working in corporations or big companies. That brings a different dimension to it. How does that work? Because I know with my own son, he's like, Dad, forget it. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm not working with you. So you've got that sort of dynamic as well. But how does that work in reality, having family in the business?
It's interesting that you bring that up because it is one of the that wasn't my objective when I started this company, but it became a kind of a reality when I've hired people and people have come and then they've transitioned out, and I'm still finding people to hire and train. And I had the same argument with my sons, and they said, look, Dad, we're not interested in going to law school and become a lawyer and helping you run this company. And I said, that's anyway, the time commitment for that is just, it's too enormous, right? And plus, if you want to go to law school, it really needs to come from within, not because your dad wants you to go to law school. So what we did was revamp the business significantly to focus only on public affairs, public policy, which is something that there are no barriers to entry. Your barriers to entry in that industry are knowing people, having integrity, having a high profile, having a reputation of delivering on promises that are made.
Speaking high-level Japanese.
And obviously speaking Japanese.
And reading, etc. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how long have you had your sons in the business?
So I went for my oldest son first, and he gave me the same reaction as yours. Dad, I appreciate all of the things that you did, but I want to cut my own cloth and
do it my way.
I really don't want to work for my dad. Hi, what do you do for a living? Oh, I work for my dad. I just don't want that. And he was pretty adamant about it. Then my second son, I approached him, and he had a job, and he was doing okay. And I said, I really need you, and I'll give you the salary that you're getting here. And he says, plus a little bit more, right? And I said, yes, okay, plus a little bit more. And so there was this negotiation, and he's now been with me for 5 years. Yeah. And doing a great job and learning the ropes. He can basically run the office and do a lot of the projects that I'm involved in. And then 2 years later, my third son, I had the same conversation with him. It was a little bit tougher then, and he's a little bit more of a fighter. And so it was a little bit harder for son number 3. But since son number 2 did it and told him it's kind of okay, he's quirky, he's old, he doesn't know what he's doing, he makes mistakes, but apart from that, it's not a bad gig.
Plus, also, I guess in a country like Japan, having family in the business is typical for a lot of small companies.
That's right.
It's not unusual. Japanese would not be surprised if they're meeting your company at the one time and it's, Langley.
Right.
Oh, this is my son. No one would go, oh, really? They would think, yeah, that's a natural thing. Not surprising. So I think there's a high degree of acceptance in Japan of that type of thing as well, which must make it interesting.
Well, it kind of is far beyond that. So in Japan, yes, if you're a sushi chef, or maybe you're a lawyer, you started the law firm and your son went to law school. Chinese restaurants, right? It's passed down. But for a lot of industries, that's really just, it's not done. It's nepotism. It's just not cool. And particularly for foreigners, we all are initially, I mean, the expatriate community, you just can't do that sort of thing. Your wife can't even get hired in the company. So this is a really unique mix. It's an opportunity for me, and it's an opportunity for them. And the other thing that's kind of interesting about it is that in this country, your relationships are an asset that can be transitioned, okay, from generation to generation. It's harder to transition that giri ningyo, this feeling of obligation and commitment, and you know, I did something for you a couple of years ago, and you kind of owe me. That package of sentiment can be transitioned, but not too distant. It can't be to a third party, you know, person who might be your vice president. It's more difficult. But to your wife and to your kids, maybe to your next of kin, it is possible if it's done right. And that's the process that we're in now.
So let's talk a little bit about trust, because we talk about Japanese business, we talk about leading. One of the big things in Japan in business is the trust factor. And, you know, people talk about risk aversion in Japan. Well, it's directly related to trust. The reason that people are risk averse is because no mistakes allowed in this country, no defects allowed. So trust becomes very important. And if you are working for some business and you're reliable, they will keep using you because they trust you.
Right.
And the gap or the danger factor of picking an unknown is too high. So no, we'll stick with who we know. Often we aren't known, so you've got to actually get in there. But once you get in there, then it tends to flow year on, which is nice. So talk a bit about, from your experience for having worked inside, you know, Japanese companies and been, you know, in the business you're in now. Talk about what trust means in Japan.
Sure. So this trust, this kind of concept of trust, one of the things that you didn't talk about is what is the consequence of a breach of trust.
Okay.
And in this country, it is rather heavy. It used to be that you would lose your head, right? If you made a mistake, you actually could lose your life. And that's a part of the culture and the tradition. It's not the reality nowadays, but it is a part. It's like, you know, in America, you know, cowboys and having your pistol and riding your horse. That's still, that feeling still is embodied in the American kind of psyche. And similarly in Japan, you know, if a breach of trust occurs, wow, there is retribution to be had. So people really overextend not to have that breach of trust. And one of those ways of avoiding that breach of trust is don't go to the unknown, right? Stick with what you know, stick with who you know, and keep relying on that relationship building that you've done.
And you're helping companies, you know, here in Japan who are coming from a foreign background, who don't understand the culture, don't understand the business culture, don't understand the language. And you're helping them to be successful here, and you try to explain these things to them. How does that work? How do you actually explain to them why you've got to do it this way, why it's important?
You've been here quite a while too, and I'm
36 years now. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to tell you something that you're just going to shake your head and say, sure, I know that, I experienced that. So a lot of times they just don't believe it. They just don't believe it can be like that, you know? You explain to them, this is how it's done and this is the way it should be done, and they go, yeah, I hear you, but it really, you know, I can finesse this one, right? And no, there's only really one good way to hand your business card. You don't try and be funny about it and you know, throw them on the table and say, I'm somebody you want to meet. You know, there's a set way, and there's a set way for a reason, right? And building trust is based on these kinds of keystones of establishing a relationship. I know what you're going to do, and you're going to do it this way, and I'm building this relationship with you. And surprises, things out of left field, you know, little things that might cause you to question the consistency, the integrity of that. For example, you have a nice suit, but your shoes are like scuffs on them, and you go, why is it like that? Or and people observe you very carefully here. They're looking for those cues. Who is this person? How can I evaluate him? Is he that kind of person? It used to be in Japan that you'd have these symbols on your kimono, and they were cues to tell the person that you're talking with, what house he represents, where he's from, probably a little bit about his hierarchy. And these are important cues to know how to deal with them, what level of Japanese to use, how low you're supposed to bow, and that sort of thing. And now that's been replaced with the business card. So the business card's a pretty key element in getting to know somebody at the beginning. Sometimes they say, forming your first impression happens in the first couple of seconds. Not 5 seconds, in the first couple of seconds.
Yeah.
So
that's true. I mean, we teach presentation skills, right? So we have a high impact presentations course. Over the last, I'd say, probably 2 or 3 years, I'd ask the class members, how long does it take you to form a first impression? Because we're teaching people how to do that, right? And they used to say, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. Over time, it's 3 seconds.
Yes.
When I ask that question today, people say, 5 seconds, 3 seconds. Whoa, So that has really changed. And so, how you come across is going to have a big importance. So if we're going to give some advice to someone who's going to take up a leadership position in Japan, so we think about, say, 3 pieces of advice. What would be something we would tell that person to prepare themselves?
Okay, well, it depends on the quality of the leader that you're talking about.
Well, they're going to come in and run the business in Japan. They're going to come in and take over the Japanese operation as the foreign leader of the company.
So that's in the hierarchy of leaders, that's the one that you almost always run into who has the most amount of problem, right? Because even though they might have been here as an exchange student or they had some experience with Japan and then they went to the United States, they finished graduate school, they worked in a company, now they're an executive and somebody says, we need somebody in Tokyo. And I went to high school in Tokyo or whatever. Maybe they're really, really good at what they do and they get sent to Japan. So you and I know these guys. We meet them all the time at the chamber events and just in our daily lives. So there's a wide spectrum of these kinds of individuals. The ones who come in as the top leader, as the chairman or as the president, these fellows usually are global leaders that have been in other locations, other geographies, and they get sent to Japan. So the big Fortune 500 leaders, they make this churn quite a bit. In many instances, they are assigned a translator, right? And their housing is paid for because they're what you would call your quintessential expatriates, right? They've read books, they've had briefings, they've visited Japan, they did the house search and that sort of thing. But people always run into the same problems, right? So once again, they're inheriting something that they didn't build. They're now transitioning. They had one president. It was time for him to transition out. He's been here as requisite 3 years. He's going someplace else. They bring somebody else in. These kinds of fellows typically surround themselves with a team, internal, to help them figure things out. But they are the main channel for the headquarters. So that is probably their number one job, to get things done, to get the funding, to get authorizations to do things, and then they talk to their team. And similarly, they coalesce the information from their team and feed it back to the United States for strategic planning, that sort of thing. The most important quality of this kind of person, and maybe it's a personality trait, I don't know, but it is the power of observation. So you know this when you go to any of these big stations, Shibuya, Tokyo Station, Shinjuku, that sort of thing, and you're lost. If you just stop for a second, take account of your surroundings, there will be cues around. There will be arrows. You just need to observe and sit. I mean, there are thousands of signs, but it'll be there. Okay? Similarly, in human interactions, look around, be observant, ask questions. Sometimes it's not just asking questions, it's just, what are people doing? What is their posture? How are they communicating with you? How do they look? Are they gesticulating? These kinds of cues help guide you to making the right decision or holding back or maybe pausing enough for somebody to finish what they were saying because they said something, and typically in Japanese communication, they say something, and the pause is just as important as the words being spoken. So you have to wait for that moment to finish, and then they start again. So a lot of people are, and it's not just Americans or Brits or Aussies, we're driven, we're aggressive, and we don't have time for those pauses. But people who study Japanese language, it's not just the words that are being uttered; it's also the pause and the things that are being left unsaid that carry as much weight as what they're verbally saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they should be observant. They should be letting people finish their sentences before jumping in. What are some other things they should be on the lookout for?
Gosh, there are so many things.
I mean, there's so many, but just think about what would be some things they could do to build trust with their teams, with their direct reports.
Yeah, this is a big one, and I'm going to say it, and then all of the thousands of people who are watching, they're going to say, "Oh yeah, that's a great piece of advice," but it is a good piece of advice, and it is language familiarity. And so one of the things that, even if you and I are English speakers, one of the ways that we develop cohesion and camaraderie and a sense of affinity is through the language, through the words that we use, through the inflection, through the diction, and through the accent, right? It's also the story, but first and foremost, it's the language. So Japanese people understand that mastering Japanese is very difficult. And everybody, who speaks, arigato gozaimasu, in a Japanese restaurant, they say, "Oh, your Japanese is so good. But they do appreciate that. And that level of appreciation, it's easy for you to generate appreciation if you just spend some time on learning the Japanese language, because they know that took time and commitment. And for the hundreds of people who didn't do that, and you did, this idiom, you're laughing at this use of the word because you know what that word means, and I like you, right?
And also the expectation is not perfection. They the joke about, we'll tell a joke about English people now, but the joke for English people is that if you speak in English to a foreigner and they don't understand, well, you just speak louder. That's a joke. It's a stereotype. But Japanese don't have an expectation that we can speak anything. And so if we can speak well or reasonably well or even just a few things, they take it as it is. They don't judge. Whereas often, I think, particularly Western peoples, we tend to be rather picky about English ability and, your accent.
Not as bad as the French.
Yeah, well, I don't know about the French too much, but you tend to associate a lot of things around accent and language usage and make assumptions. Whereas I don't think the Japanese are having that baggage that we would have. Perhaps.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example of that, though. So in many companies, the new boss, or maybe you're working inside the company, one of the biggest mistakes that you can make is hiring the wrong person. And it happens all the time. And one of the reasons why we might make that wrong decision is because the person that we have identified speaks English, Japanese person speaks English so well, and we assign them a degree of credibility that they yet have not earned. Okay? The same thing happens with Japanese. It's a natural human thing to do. If I'm speaking to you in your language, your heart opens up, and the bigger the degree, the bigger the opening. But it is a bit of a blind spot, I think, for foreigners and also for Japanese. But it's more often for the foreigner, it is a good opportunity, not a negative opportunity. So it does bear benefit for somebody to spend the time on, number one, learning hiragana and katakana. You can do that in a couple of days. And also just the pronunciation. There are, about 50 tones. Just master those tones. They don't inflect it too much. There are tones in speaking Japanese. You master that, and the rest of it is just vocabulary and putting sentences together. People really appreciate that.
Okay, well, that's great advice. And so thank you very much. Timothy, we've had a nice stroll through your glorious career to date. It's been fascinating, very unique. I mean, I've lived here a long time. I've known you for a long time. You are a unique person in your experiences and what you do, the role you play in this country. So that's what I appreciate.
Thank you
for taking the time today to have me hosted here in your beautiful office.
No, it's great. Now I can't wait. I'm going to be famous. I'm on the Greg Story, cutting edge. This is
where it's all going to be happening. Well, this has been another episode of Japan's top business interviews. Please join us again for the next exciting episode. We'll be coming to you very shortly with another interview. Thank you very much.